Last lab, we took our first steps towards laying out our web page. Right? In this lab, we shall look at a few primary attributes that go a long way in controlling the size and geometry of various elements on your web page. These attributes are margin. So a margin specifies the space between an element and all its adjoining elements. So margin is the space that lies outside the border of an element. Padding is the space which is defined within an element, and it specifies the space between the borders of your element and all content that is contained within. The border attribute specifies the method in which the outer periphery or border of your element is shown, whereas the height and width attributes specify the height and width respectively of your element. Now let us start with margins. Now you might have appreciated already that every element on your web page is like a box, right? So there are four sides to it. So whenever you specify an attribute that deals with an element, you should be able to specify values per side, right? And that is applicable to the margin attribute as well. So let's say we want to specify that there should be some space between the left side of your element and the element that lies to the left of your element, right? So let us go to the div which has an ID of change me, and let us specify a margin attribute for the left side of your element, right? So let's say we shall specify a margin left with a value of 10 and unit pixels, right? So let's save this and let's hit preview. So what do you see? So this is the div which is highlighted here that we changed right now, and as you can see there is some space between the left side of your div and the element that lies to the left of your div. Now note that I've used a unit pixel here. I can change this pixel to a percentage value, right? So let's save this. Let's hit preview once again. So you see you have a much larger spacing between your div here and the div that lies to its left. Now why did that happen? Well, a percentage value when specified computes the actual value as the percent of the width of the containing element. So here the div with ID change me lies inside the div with ID main page. So what 10% will do is that it will first compute the width of the div with ID main page, compute 10% of that value and assign that as margin left. Clear? So just like we've specified a margin left, we can also specify a margin right. Let's say we assign a value 10 pixels, right? Let's save this, hit preview. So there you go. Now you have a space to the right of the div element as well. Cool. Similarly, you can assign values for the top and the bottom sides of this div change me as well. Now this is one way of specifying margins, but there is also a shorthand available. So let's look at how that shorthand works. What we can do is, instead of specifying margin left, margin right, so on and so forth, we can actually specify a series of numbers. So what we can do is something like this. So what have I done here? I have specified a series of 4 numbers, right? So let's save this. Let's hit preview. Well, what do you see? You see a space to the left, you see a space to the right, and that's about it. Now how did that happen? So as I mentioned, that every element on your web page will have 4 sides to it, right? So what we're doing here is we're specifying a value for each side, and there is a protocol that tells the browser as to how to interpret these values. So what is the protocol? So we start from the top, right? So 0 says that there is no margin at the top. 10 pixels says that please assign a margin of 10 pixels on the right. Once again 0 specifies that there is no margin at the bottom, and 10 pixels that we need a margin of 10 pixels and on the left side. So essentially it starts from top and goes in clockwise direction. So far so good. What I can also do is I can mix and match units. So I specify a percentage for the right side and a pixel for the left side. So I've done that, and there you go, right? So I hope you're with me so far. But that's not all. There is more you can do with this shorthand. So let's look at what those are. I can do something like this. So I specify just two values, right? I hit preview. So what's happened here? Do you see? So what this does is specifies a margin of 0 for the top and bottom sides and a margin of 10% for the left and right sides. Okay? But that's not all. I can in fact add a third value here. And what this will do is that it says margin of 0 for the top side, margin of 10% for the right side, margin of 5 pixel for the bottom side, and since I have not specified the fourth number, it will take it as 10% for the left side, right? Now you probably have already guessed that I can also specify a single number, right? And what that will do is that it's going to assign that number to all sides of your element, right? Great. Now, as a reference, you can refer to the CSS file to get a feel of how these attributes can be specified and typically what kind of values you can assign to them. Great. Now let's move on to the next step. In this step, we are going to look at padding. So as I mentioned earlier, a padding is the spacing that is assigned between the side or the border of your element and the content contained within. The semantics of padding are identical to those of margin. So please experiment with adding the padding attribute to your web page and see how they stack up against the margin attribute.